Hiya. Like Dan said, my name's Sabrina, and like Matt, I'm also a final year student here at St George's. And as a final year student, the future's been on my mind quite a lot recently. This year, my decisions feel a lot bigger and scarier than they have before. I wonder what decisions you might be faced with right now. Tonight, I want to think about what it looks like to put God at the centre of these decisions. So in the book of Jonah, we see God giving Jonah a really clear instruction. His next step is to go to this city called Nineveh and preach against it. God makes this so clear to Jonah. And what does Jonah do? Runs the absolute opposite direction. He boards a ship to Tarshish and he just runs away. He's trying to get away from God and away from what he's been asked to do. But Nineveh is a city and it's known for its wickedness. So why would Jonah not want to condemn them? First, I think it's important to understand who the Ninevites were. Nineveh was the capital city of Assyria, and the Assyrians and the Israelites, total enemies, hated each other because the Assyrians had basically deported the Israelites from the land which had originally been theirs. But that doesn't explain why Jonah wouldn't want to preach against them. Now, in the face of knowing what he's supposed to do, as I say, Jonah ran the opposite direction, and God could have left him alone. He could have asked someone else, but God didn't give up on Jonah. Now, while Jonah was sleeping peacefully on a boat to Tarshish, God sent a great wind. And the storm was so bad, the ship looked like it was going to break apart. And all the people on the boat were terrified, and they were all crying out to their own God. Eventually, someone finds Jonah sleeping downstairs and is like, "Jonah, wake up, pray to your God, we're all about to die." So Jonah says, "Oh, well, I'm a Hebrew, and my God is the God who made heaven. He's the God of the wind and the sea." This terrifies everyone on the boat, and they're like, "Right, what have you done, and what do we have to do?" So Jonah tells them, "Just throw me overboard." And they look at him and they go, "Well, no, we're not going to do that." And he says, no, do it. And eventually, they do. And they pray to God, and they're like, "Sorry, God, he kind of told us to. We kind of had to." But after this, the storm calms down, and they turn to God. So this shows us that God knew Jonah's heart, and he used it to get a group of pagan sailors to meet him. So he can use our responses to him, even if they're disobedient. God also then saves Jonah. A great fish swallows Jonah. After about 3 days of sitting in it, Jonah eventually prays that he'll do as God asked him to. So the fish vomits him out on land. Then Jonah, he hears from God again, and God says, "Go to Nineveh, give them this message." So Jonah finally does as God asks, and he proclaims 40 more days, and Nineveh will be overthrown, which might be the worst preach I've ever heard. But the city of Nineveh repents. The king hears Jonah's warning, and he issues a decree that there will be a city-wide fast, and everyone and every animal is to wear sackcloth and call on God and give up their evil ways. And God sees this turn from evil, and he relents. He doesn't bring them harm. And that is why Jonah ran in the first place. In chapter 4, he tells God, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew you were a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it's better for me to die than to live." This shows us that God sees the big picture. Jonah sees the Ninevites as these horrible people who do not deserve God's salvation, despite the fact he's the one who disobeyed God by trying to go to Tarshish. Now, our humanity can cloud our vision, but not God's. And we see God using Jonah's disobedience and lukewarm obedience to give grace and salvation to more than 120,000 people. So what can God do, if we're fully obedient to his will? Well, our salvation was only possible through Jesus' perfect obedience, even to death on a cross. In Mark 14, we find Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It says, going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Now, at the end of Jonah's story, we see him angry at God's compassion. He waits to see what will happen to the Ninevites. And during this time, God provides him a plant to ease his discomfort. Slightly randomly, God later sends a worm to eat the plant, and it withers and it dies. The chapter ends with God saying to Jonah, you've been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight, and it died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? From this, we see that God's will transcends human understanding, and his will is that of love, grace, and salvation. Now, in Jonah's story, he yearns for death, so he won't have to see the Ninevites gain God's love, whereas Jesus died a brutal death on the cross so that we may have God's salvation. So when we're faced with difficult decisions or uncertainty, we can remember that God's factored in our disobedience, God can see the big picture, and God's will transcends human understanding, which means we can have confidence in our decisions if they're for him rather than ourselves, because his will means salvation.